Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
I am a voice of many, but I am not the last, and I won't be until we come through the realization of our true crisis on our hands. I am speaking of my brothers and sisters of color, specifically of my Indigenous, Asian Americans, Pacific Islander, Black and Latino people of culture. We are being kidnapped, murdered, and lost. This true crime podcast narrows on the murdered and missing Indigenous persons, LGBTQ, two-spirits, as well as my other beautiful sisters and brothers of color and their families. The families that had tried ever so wretchedly to get their voices heard across social media and news broadcasts in the endless fight to get justice in a world so unjust because of our skin color or of their status or their creed. This podcast shines a light. It makes our voices stronger, bolder, fearless amongst this large pond of true crime. My name is Jasmine Castillo, and I am a Black Indigenous person of color, a woman that has a deep understanding of the pain of my extended community struggling to find a voice amongst the cries of sorrow and anguish. I will have a variety of families as well as nonprofit organizations and a variety of other guests. We will discuss on human trafficking, the missing and murdered, and the brutality against people of color. My current focus will be in the U.S. and Canada. I hope to extend my podcast across the world to other continents of our lost loved ones. We stand and we won't back down until all our sisters and brothers are home. Welcome to Hands Off My Podcast.
This is Ash.
And I'm Jordan.
We host Creepy Tapas on the Darkcast Network. On our show, we serve up tiny tastes of terror, true stories that haunt and chill. So you can imagine our tastes are a little on the darker side. That's why when I'm looking for the perfect gift for my super spooky friends, or something unique for myself, I get all snuggled up, head online to shop at Batwings and Butterflies.
Batwings and Butterflies is an independent, creator-owned boutique of handmade knit creations. Some are wild, some are dark, but all are sure to please even the hardest person to shop for.
You'll find baby Baphomets, super giant stuffed tarantulas, blankets, plant hangers, water pipe cozies, and so much more. All items are original works of art by a talented artisan.
Support small businesses and order your one-of-a-kind creation today.
Find Batwings and Butterflies at batwingsandbutterflies.bigcartel.com or on Instagram at batwingsandbutterflies. I'm in love with this fucking pizza blanket so much. I need this pizza blanket. It's incredible. Isn't that the cutest thing you've ever seen?
Ooh, yeah, it really is.
Isn't that fun? And look at that baby Baphomet.
Oh, I love my little stuffed Baphomet.
You get 20% off your first purchase at Batwings and Butterflies. Just type in the code DARKCAST20 at checkout and tell them Creepy Tapas sent you. Batwings and Butterflies, Batwings and Butterflies.
Get your creepy shit.
Get your creep on at Batwings and Butterflies. Meh.
Me.
We're really good at ads.
Hey there! I'm your best friend and your worst influence, and I'm super happy to carry on the tradition. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors, and welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. I apologize for this episode being a little late. I've been having a plumbing crisis, but my neighbor's trying to help me fix it. Happy New Year! I hope 2023 will be a wonderful year for all of us. I don't really do resolutions because I find I break them too often. Then I feel like a loser, so why even bother? I'd rather just muddle along in life, and if I can do something good for myself, great. And if I can't, then oh well. At least I still have my self-love and confidence. Because everyone knows confidence is sexy. As long as it's not overconfidence. Because that comes across as cocky, and it's ugly. It's a fine line, my Rainbow Warriors. Find me on the socials just about everywhere as Rainbow Crimes or Darkcast Network. Speaking of Darkcast Network, we lost some shows, but we've also gained some new ones. and we'll be bringing on even more this coming year. Please check out our website at darkcastnetwork.wixsite.com/indie, INDIE. And there you can see some of the great shows we have to offer you. We even now have international shows that have joined us, including true crime shows like Scottish Murders and Crime Divers from the UK. So take a peek at our website. Once again, that's darkcastnetwork.wixsite.com/INDIE. This episode I will cover several murder cases. The victims were all gay hairdressers. And while I was researching the ones that I'm covering today, I found even more. So maybe someday I'll cover the others in another episode. I'd like to start out with a cold case from 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Joseph Weir was born during the Depression, and as a teenager he spent most of his time sauntering in and out of his mother's hair salon. He loved every aspect of this salon, but his mother was not supportive of his passion, and she laughed at him, telling him he could never be a hairdresser. This didn't deter Joseph in the least. In fact, it gave him the drive he needed to prove her wrong. He not only became a hairdresser, as an adult, he came to own 5 salons. But in order to staff these salons with other qualified hairdressers, Joseph realized that he needed to open up a beauty school and train people how to cut, curl, and style hair how he wanted it done, to perfection. Joseph was a huge hit in the beauty salon business in the 1950s, 60s, and the 1970s. If someone back then wanted to look pretty in Knoxville, they went to one of Joseph's salons. And to be very apropos, one of Joseph's salons was located on Gay Street in Knoxville. You go, Joseph! Because Joseph was also a proud gay man, as proud as he could be in that time era. Joseph always dressed nicely. He was a dapper man and very clean and tidy, not just in his appearance, but also in his environments. For about 20 years, the salons were Joseph's livelihood. At the age of 50-something, Joseph would retire from the beauty business. He wanted to embark into a new business and open up a gay nightclub, and that he did. It was also on Gay Street, called Club Europa. People say Europa was one of the better gay bars of its era, and that Joseph would always sit up at the front of the bar and hold court by telling stories and gossiping about the goings-on within the surrounding community. There was dancing and drag shows and lots of cheap drinks. Kind of sounds like paradise. But then in 1982, the World's Fair was on its way to Knoxville. A wealthy businessman saw the location of the club as the perfect spot for a skyscraper. City administrators were keen to clean up the downtown Knoxville area, so they joined efforts to get Joseph to sell, which he eventually did, but not without a fight. Joseph mainly lived alone in a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home, along with his 3 poodles, of course. And every once in a while, his landscaper handyman named Willie would stay over in a guest bedroom. Joseph also had one of his hairdresser protégés stay in the home for a year, and that was why he traveled the globe. When Joseph got back to Knoxville, the protégé moved out, and Joseph was again living solo. But to stave off loneliness, Joseph would drive himself downtown and pick up a hustler soliciting sex. But it seems there were some shady people Joseph might have inadvertently got involved with when he owned the gay nightclub. After he sold the club, he took the lights and the sound system, and he rented them out to another nightclub. The manager of the other nightclub had a hand in some suspicious stuff, but he also had a hand in with some local politicians and some of Knoxville Police Department. It would seem Joseph had a falling out with this manager. By now it was the fall of 1983. Joseph had just returned home to Knoxville after spending a lovely Thanksgiving with his family. The day was November 28th, and at least one person had been let into Joseph's home. Since there was no sign of forced entry, police believed Joseph knew his attacker or attackers, and Joseph had a state-of-the-art for the time period security alarm system. So police could have definitely been able to tell if the home had been forced into. The scuffle between Joseph and his attacker started upstairs and it worked its way downstairs until it ended up in the backyard. Ultimately, Joseph was stabbed to death, but he fought like a beast, which was indicated by all the slashes on both sides of his hands and arms. Joseph's body was found the following day in the backyard. It was under some trimmed tree branches, and it was his landscaper and handyman Willie that found him. Joseph's wallet, some blank checks, and his Cadillac had been taken. The Cadillac was later recovered in North Carolina. Willie, the landscaper/handyman, quickly became a suspect to Joseph's murder. And it makes me wonder if Willie had been a white man, would they have looked into him so hard? While Willie remained on the suspect list, others were added, including the young hustlers Joseph would sometimes pick up for pleasure. One theory is that the hustlers were looking for an easy mark to roll, and they didn't expect Joseph to put up such a struggle, so they killed him. Another theory was the shady manager of the other nightclub, who seemingly had some officials and some police officers in his back pocket. But that manager didn't have the FBI wrapped around his finger, because they raided his office at the nightclub and they accused and arrested him for running a cocaine and gambling ring. Detectives on Joseph's case started to wonder if the manager put a hit out on Joseph because of their volatile past. But this theory was quickly nixed due to the fact that hired killers generally don't use knives and stab. They use guns and shoot. Evidence has since been lost on this case. Not all of it, but a good portion of it. For instance, the Cadillac, it was turned over to the insurance company almost immediately, and who knows what happened to it from there. Plus, it was 1983, so the important DNA stuff that could solve this case today wasn't collected. A man did go to the police department. He named 3 men he said he dropped off at Joseph's the night he was murdered. And the 3 men were brought in and questioned. Of course, they denied they had anything to do with it. And since police had nothing to substantiate their accusations, they had to drop pursuing the 3 men. Rest in power, Joseph. Now let's take a trip over to the UK and talk about 18-year-old hairdresser Michael Causer, who was brutally murdered. Michael was actually in training to be a hairdresser. His friends described him as kind-hearted and very caring. Knowing he was gay, Michael's family was supportive and accepting of him. He came out to his mom when he was 14. He said, "Mom, I think I'm gay." She asked if it was because he was around his sister and her friends too much, and he said, "No, I like girls, but I don't fancy them." And his mother was perfectly fine with him living his truth. Michael had always loved doing something different with his hair. One day it'd be permed, another it would be shaved, and on a different day it would have blue tips or purple tips. Hair was fun for Michael. But on July 25th, 2008, Michael lay fighting for his life in the hospital. He'd been beaten. He had severe head injuries, a fractured jaw, and a blood clot in his brain that required emergency surgery. 8 days later, Michael would lose the fight and die in the hospital. In the relatives' room of the hospital sat 2 young men, 20-year-old James O'Connor and 18-year-old Michael Binstead. The 2 claimed they were Michael Causer's friends and that he'd been jumped by 3 teenagers who beat and took Michael's phone. Not only did they tell this story to the family of Michael Causer, but they spun the same story to the police as well. Police weren't really buying the story from Michael's so-called friends, and they started to dig a little deeper. On July 24th, some people Michael knew had invited him to a pub. He went, and then after some drinks, the group moved the party to someone's house. Michael had drank a lot that night. So much, in fact, he needed to find a bedroom and just try to sleep it off. While Michael slept, two of the guys at the party, James, who I mentioned earlier, and a 19-year-old guy named Gavin Alker, got a hold of Michael's phone and they started to peruse through it. They saw photos of Michael in explicit sexual positions. That inspired these two goons to go upstairs where Michael lay passed out. They began shouting gay slurs at the highly intoxicated 18-year-old. When that wasn't effective, they started to hit and kick him. Gavin, who had never even ever met Michael before, was the one who used the gay slurs mostly. He denied it and said that James was the one who physically attacked Michael, but it was in self-defense when Michael threw the first punch. Listen, you couple of freaking instigators. No one's dumb enough to buy into your bullshit. Michael was petite, only 5'6", and he weighed 7.5 stone or 105 pounds. He was passed out. He's not going to throw a punch. After beating the shit out of him, James, Gavin, and Michael Binstead, who I also mentioned earlier, carried our Michael Causer, out to the street and they dumped him. Then they called for emergency services. That's when Michael Binstead and James followed the ambulance to the hospital. James, Binstead, and Gavin were all arrested. Gavin's charges were dropped and he walked away a free man. Binstead was given a 34-week suspended sentence and he walked too, although he wasn't a violent participant. James received a life sentence after he pled guilty to the attack of Michael. Life sentence in England is normally about 15 years. Which would mean that James might be out of prison and living his best life in his late 30s right now. Rest in power, Michael. 57-year-old Chris Vo was the well-known stylist to see if you lived in Cleveland, Ohio. He came to America along with his brother as teenagers from a refugee camp in Vietnam. He's been described by those who knew him as kind, caring, funny, and the life of any party. His home was known as the Flower House in his community, because Chris would have flower arrangements all around the outside of his home. This was to honor Vietnam refugees who came to America. He worked at the Cameron Rose Salon and Spa in Rocky River, and he'd been a hairstylist for a little over 25 years. In late December of 2021, a neighbor was out taking a brisk walk. They walked past Chris's house. The neighbor saw what appeared to be blood oozing from underneath Chris's garage door. Trespassing just a little bit, the neighbor got a closer look, and the fluid coming from underneath the garage really did look like blood. The neighbor called the police with what they saw. It's been surmised Chris was last seen alive on December 24th of 2021. In his garage he'd been attacked, shot in the chest and stabbed, and when his body was found it was in a large pool of his own blood. Robbery seems to be the motive for Chris's murder. The suspects in the murder are both 27-year-old men from the Cleveland LGBTQ+ community. Chad Webb and Daniel Mobley are the men being accused, and both have pled not guilty. Both of the men have criminal records, and both of the men are currently being held on a $5 million bond. There's no word when their trial will be, or if the men have already been tried, but I don't believe they have been yet. The prosecution is set to possibly go for the death penalty in this case. Rest in power, Chris. Our true crime quickie is another hairdresser who first went missing and then his remains were located. This case also happens to come to us from the Knoxville, Tennessee area, just like the Joseph Weir case. Wow, Knoxville doesn't seem to like its gay hairdressers very much, does it? 47-year-old Byron Barker disappeared on May 15, 2005. His family was unable to get in touch with him, and they reported the hairdresser missing 4 days later. Byron's vehicle was found in a Williamsburg, Kentucky motel parking lot weeks later. A little bit of blood was found inside Byron's vehicle, and this led investigators to believe foul play was involved. 3 years went by, and no sign of Byron. Then in 2008, 2 men were walking some of a 25-acre farm that one of them owned. That's when they came across the skull they thought was from someone's old Halloween decorations. One of the men then realized there were even more bones they were standing on. The bones were the remains of a human male. The bones belonged to Byron Barker. The Knoxville police had a suspect in the case, and they were able to pick up Brett Allen Baker on a parole violation in November of 2008. Brett had once worked as a shampooer at the same salon as Byron worked, but Brett denied doing anything nefarious to Byron. And even with Brett on their radar, even though Brett has committed previous crimes before, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest Brett. And Byron Barker's murder continues to remain a mystery today. Rest in power, Byron. Well, that's all I have for you today, Rainbow Warriors. And as I said, I have found other gay hairdressers who have been murdered, and it might be an episode for a future time. But until then, remember, you matter, and I love you. And it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.